Hello, my name is Bob Dawson, and you're watching the Griot and Me. I'm, as I said, a native Nova Scotian from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Have been born and raised there all my life until 1980 when I moved to Ottawa, accepted a position here with the federal government. Actually, I had transferred here, having worked in the federal government in Halifax since 1973. So from 1973 to 1980, I was employed with the Federal Public Service, more specifically the Public Service Commission of Canada. Worked there in the area of human resources management, and I was responsible for implementing and establishing the Black Employment Program, which was intended to increase the representation of blacks within the federal departments. And in 1980, I accepted a position here in Ottawa, again with the Public Service Commission of Canada, and worked in a couple of other departments, employment and immigration, and then eventually went back to the Public Service Commission of Canada and retired in 2011 and have been retired happily ever since. One has to keep in mind that essentially Nova Scotia, it being a society and actually being the one of the first places where, going back to the American Revolution, where blacks were upon secession of the 13 colonies, blacks left New York to and settle in Nova Scotia primarily, and then eventually migrated to other parts of Nova Scotia. Initially, they had settled in what was called Shelburne or Birchtown, but as I said, eventually they migrated to other places like Halifax, Yarmouth, Weymouth, and other points, Sydney, St. John's, etc. And so Nova Scotia essentially, believe it or not, was what I would consider a racist province from the early settling of Nova Scotia up to and including the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. I was born in the late 40s, and it was, and still is to some extent, a racist province, a racist society. So much so that racism pervaded all aspects of life, in terms of the educational system, employment opportunities, as well as the media, particularly in terms of the images, the reporting, which sort of had created certain perceptions and misconceptions about blacks living in Nova Scotia. I can relate a few to you. Wherein sort of growing up, as I said, in Dartmouth, blacks would go into local stores like Woolworths, for example, And in going in, of course, you're looking around at various clothing items, etc. You have floor walkers following you to ensure that you didn't steal anything. Okay? I can recall working, well, another example, in grade 6. I was attending public school, and this was around about the time of report cards were being handed out. And a white teacher said to me, you needn't think about going to university because you don't have what it takes. So that for me was a defining moment and an emotional one in my life. And it had quite an impact, because one has to remember, as I had indicated earlier, that in terms of racism being an aspect of life in the school system, blacks were streamed. And when I say streamed, what I mean is that they were counseled to not pursue university or higher levels of education, but rather to focus more on the trades and that type of training. And also, I might even mention that up until 1964, there was a segregated school outside of Dartmouth, where it was all blacks, and it was basically in a black community. On another occasion, when I was working with the Federal Public Service, the Public Service Commission, and I happened to go to the Bank of Montreal, more or less to check on my my affairs, my banking affairs, and the teller had pulled out a card on me, and I happened to notice on the card in the corner there was the letter B for black, and so I questioned the teller why that was there, and he indicated to me, which was an excuse, that it was a means of, in the event that there was another person who had a similar name, that was a way of distinguishing me from the other person. And so that really upset me to the point where I asked to see the manager. The manager wasn't around. And however, what I did, I thought that I'm not going to let this go. And so I brought it to the attention of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, who were going to take that up as a case to sort of investigate and see whether or not this was a systemic problem. I remember filing a report with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. I believe that they had, in fact, contacted the bank because ultimately I had received a letter of apology. And in that letter, it indicated that they would sort of review their practices. And so that problem, I think, rectified itself. But if I can go back to my days at St. Mary's University, wherein I was the first black to play in the Atlantic Intercollegiate Hockey League with St. Mary's University in 1967. So being the first and only black, the first couple of years were trying years for me. I recall one game where we had played at the University of Prince Edward Island in Charlottetown, where prior to the game, we were out skating around for the warm-up. And very small rink, and ultimately the spectators were close to the ice surface. So in skating around, I heard the word nigger, snowflake, coon. As I said, during the warm-up, and then during the course of the game, I heard the word nigger from players, and also these players were very physical in terms of they would slash me behind the legs. They would, what I call sort of a common term in hockey is slew foot, wherein they would come up behind you and sweep the legs from underneath you. So for the first couple of years, that's the kind of abuse that I had experienced. However, in 1969, there was another black who had joined the team, Darrell Maxwell from Toronto, Nova Scotia. And then in 1970, there was a third black who had joined the team. So there were three of us, and we had, in a sense, you might say, became or established a bit of a honor or a recognition for the three of us being there. But ironically, in 1970, we were playing at Mount Nelson University in Sackville, New Brunswick, and I'm a defenseman. The other two individuals, Darrell and Percy, are forwards. And so we were sitting on the bench, and our coach, Bob Boucher, who was white, looked down the bench and said, "Okay, Bob, Darrell, and Percy, I want you to go out and play together on the forward line." And we sort of looked at one another in sort of bewilderment, because as I mentioned, I am a defenseman. I played some forward in high school, and Darrell and Percy are forwards. So we decided, he said, "Come on, get out there." So we decided we'd go out, and so we did, and we became, as a result of that, the first all-black line in Canadian university hockey history. And again, we had, that distinction was somewhat comparable to Herb and Ozzie Carnegie, as well as Manny McIntyre, who were the first all-black line in professional hockey back in the early 40s. So we were quite honored to sort of fall within that sort of category, and there was no what shall we say, publicity around that occasion. But in years later, when we look back at it, we felt very, very proud in having that distinction. And in 2014, Rogers Sportsnet did a feature on our line, which was aired during Scotiabank Hockey Day in Canada, and yeah, it was quite something for us. And as a matter of fact, last year, our alma mater, St. Mary's University, had opened a new arena, and in the new arena, they have panels. There's 5 panels, and one of the panels, we are depicted in the panel along with Willie O'Ree in the reception area of the new arena. So that to us was quite an honor that the university had bestowed on us in recognition of our time at the university. In terms of Ottawa, I think Ottawa is still in the process of trying to cope with the issues affecting people of color. When I look at for example, the school system, I'm a community member of the ACE committee, the Advisory Committee on Equity with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. And while that committee has existed for, I guess, a number of years, it's only recently through I think that the pressure the school board has felt for a number of years coming from the community. And change is starting to happen in terms of the survey that has been implemented by the school board with a view to getting a true sense of what's happening in the school system with respect to people of color, suspensions, performance rates, and the impact of the school system on people of color, the sort of getting at some factors that as well impinge upon the thinking and the behavior of people of color, mental health issues, discrimination within the school system, and really the need to even go so far as looking at the curriculum. Because the curriculum, going back to my time, was absent of the positive contributions of blacks. And without that, which feeds into the identity of students and has an impact in terms of self-esteem and how they perceive themselves, the school system needs to do a lot more in terms of addressing that whole issue. Because when you talk about history, history is black history as well. In terms of policing, back in 1993, I was involved with the Ottawa Carleton Police Race Relations Committee. It was a committee that was made up of certainly police officers, but also members from people of color from the community. And I must admit that back then there were issues, not to the extent there are today, but in terms of the issues that were there, we were somewhat successful because we were able to develop a strategy, sort of it was a community action strategy that for some years was implemented with a view to preventing and in terms of racial incidences among racialized groups, blacks as well as Aboriginal people, when there were incidences that there was a protocol or a strategy to try and mitigate or downplay the issues, particularly where there were members of the black community or the Indigenous or Aboriginal community. National Capital Alliance on Race Relations was another organization that I was involved in and did good work in terms of trying to address issues of race relations within the Ottawa community. We used to put on workshops, information sessions for the general public. We also were involved in quite closely working with the law enforcement, provincial law enforcement agency, wherein we had the opportunity to review and provide input into policies, race relations policies that the provincial government was looking to develop and implement. I had served on the executive board of the National Capital Alliance on Race Relations, and also was the chair of the police committee. And one thing that I thought would be appropriate, and the board agreed to, was to establish a police minority youth program. That program was one where the intent was to try to improve relations between the youth and the police. And what we did, this was a program that operated during the summer. We had recruited, I think, about 20 youth, particularly from the black community. These individuals were provided with an opportunity to become familiar with all aspects of policing. They did ride-alongs. They participated in forensic autopsies. They participated in information sessions. And I'm proud to say that after a few years of that program, 11 to 12 individuals eventually became police officers. You know, so that was a positive outcome of the program, which the Ottawa Police Force, which was made up of Nepean, Ottawa, as well as Gloucester. That was prior to amalgamation, and all those police services were quite supportive of the program. Ideally, it would be nice if, in growing up, I didn't have to go through what I went through, nor other people like me would have to go through what I went through and they went through, and to a great extent what we're still going through. But maybe there is a reason why I and others are going through what we're going through. Because as I said, it takes each of us to make a difference for all of us. And it's only going through that process, I think, that in terms of identifying issues and the need for change, that we can make that change once we realize what the changes that need to be made, and of course the need for pushing for that change to occur, so that we have a society which truly lives up to the principles of fairness and equity and so forth. thing that I've learned about this, that life is a journey. And in that journey, there are what I call significant moments that both negative as well as positive, and that shape the way we think, the way I think, or the way we think, and also it has an impact on our development and the choices we make in life. And luckily enough for me, the negative experiences that I've had, I didn't let those overtake my life. And what I found very important too is attitude. The attitude that you take and how you look at what happens to you in your life. Because what happens to you in your life is you can control that. And for me, I've always taken the approach that don't be affected by what happens to you, but rather to do the reverse. You affect what happens to you. And as I said, that has been my mantra through life. And I think that in that, I think it takes each of us to make a difference for all of us. And that's what I've tried to do in my life, to reach out and make a difference for others. And as Rosa Parks would say, really our life is about being a model for others. And if I think we all can do that as people of color, I think it can further enhance the lives of others and opportunities for others. Life is an opportunity. It's also a gift. And as I had mentioned in terms of looking back to Rosa Parks, I think our lives, we are to be sort of role models for others, to seek change and to be that change that we want to see in the world, and more importantly, to not only be affected by that change, but to affect that change. Because until we push for change, it won't happen. So I guess my parting words for the next generation is to fight the good fight and to be the change that they want to see in the world. I see this, the Griot in me as a positive program or project. I think for me, the capturing of stories and the sharing of stories is important, not only for the present generation, but for generations to come, to see that history, that story being told. So hats off to you and your colleagues for this important program.